As I said earlier, this is our Different Lens service with Kristie Olson. Kristie brings a lens of being a transnational adoptee, and Kristie will help open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts to the complex balance of identity and rediscovering personal power in learning about one's history and family ties to their birth country and the country of adoption. And also, Kristie is finishing up preparations to leave to serve as a volunteer for a year with the ELCA's Young Adults and Global Mission Program in Hungary. During our Different Lens service, we hear from faith leaders who are also people of color or folks in the LGBTQ plus community in order to learn from them something new or different about faith or about the biblical story than we might have been taught. So, Kristie, when I sense that you're wrapping up, I'll join you back up here for a couple of questions before we close our worship service in prayer. And that's all I need to say.
Great. Thank you for having me today. Let me get set up here. Just a second. There are too many things. All right. Okay, so again, my name is Kristie Olson. I'm a transnational and transracial adoptee from Yangchun, China, in the Guangdong province. I was adopted by a predominantly white family, and I've grown up in Minnesota my entire life. So first I'm going to kind of talk about the global phenomenon of transnational adoption, and then we'll kind of work through the adoption lens, cultural lens, and then how it can apply to today's text, and then a call for action. Oops. Hold on. Okay. So first, I'll kind of, sorry, I'm working on what that kind of looks like. So first, I'd like to offer a call to action. So just in a moment, if you want to raise your hand, if you have a connection to adoption, this could be you know an adoptee, you are an adoptee, you have an adoptee in your family, or you have parents, siblings, family members, all that good stuff. Yeah. So it looks like we all, pretty much all have some sort of connection to adoption. That's great. So yeah, I invite you today to hold space for the adoptees in your life. Be curious, compassionate, and also open to understanding kind of the complexities that come with that identity. So when we look at the global phenomenon of adoption, it actually follows a pretty interesting time and space lens. A lot of adoption follows times of turmoil or strife in a country that kind of push out kind of the community care being held in that community, and then on to hopefully other nations that are able to take that and help give that kind of peace and solace. So for China, the one-child policy was a huge driver for that. For Korean adoptees, it kind of followed post-war Korean War. For Greek and Russian adoptees, a lot of that can be tied to the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union, which tend to put a lot of strife into those communities. Since China began allowing international adoption in 1992, over 160,000 Chinese children were adopted by families in predominantly the global north, also known as higher income countries. For those who aren't familiar with kind of the updated academic space, we kind of use the terminology high income country and low income country. So that kind of is a shift from having something, or having the ranking of a country be GDP based, to kind of you're acknowledging income, but also that there's rich cultures and histories in there. And something that first world and third world doesn't necessarily look at is kind of the quality of life and using that index. So the US is actually a leading receiving country, and actually has about 29% of all global adoption. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the adoptee experience beyond the savior narrative. So for those who don't know, Christianity and adoption has had a very connected relationship, and there were actually ads in church newspapers that kind of highlighted this call to adoption, and it's almost jarring if you look at it now. It kind of looks like an ad you would see for pet adoptions, and kind of give to this cause. We're calling you as people of the church who can come in and care for these children, but in a pretty just kind of weird, commodified way. It's kind of a little uncomfortable to see that being an ad in the newspaper. A lot of white saviorism and the commodification of adoptees is involved in this process because it's a feel-good action, right? And it's also sometimes in connection with personal family planning and all of those things as well, but a lot of it traditionally has been, we're going to save these children from squalor or poverty and all of the things. So the need to reframe adoption is something that I'm pretty passionate about, and a large focus on restoration, reunification, and child-centered care. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we continue on. So I'm going to go over a couple of vocabulary words that are used in adoptee spaces today. You probably won't see this if you were in connection to an adoptee agency, because it's kind of more on the lines of the social culture of adoption and a little bit less about the bureaucratic red tape kind of process for that. So traditionally, adoption has been kind of seen in the right image, where it focuses really on a triangle with a heart around it, and that is representing 3 touch points in adoption: the adoptee themselves, the biological family, or first family is actually a newer term we use for that, and then the adoptive parent. And this kind of is not really representative of the whole story of adoption. There's a lot of pieces that are in between, and a lot of identity pieces that aren't necessarily showing when you look at it just as a triangle. And the constellation framework is seen as a little bit more of an expansive way to look at adoption. There might be stars or pieces that are more closely tied together. There might be adoptees who have a stronger relationship with their adoptive parents and their biological or first family parents. Some who might be completely estranged or isolated from both or from one set of families. There are also ones who are really connected into spaces with other adoptees, and there are also ones who aren't necessarily connected at all. So the constellation model kind of is supposed to help be all-encompassing of the adoptee experience. The second terminology piece is called coming out of the fog, and this is kind of a time where adoptees are exploring their identity. This can come at any stage of life for a lot of people, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but a lot of people experience this differently throughout different stages of development. When you're younger, for transnational, transracial adoptees specifically, it's a who am I surrounded by? Do I look like my parents? Do I look like those I'm in community with? To, as you get older and you have questions about, what's my history? Who am I coming from? What pieces am I going to be living with for the rest of my life? And this can come with a lot of grief, because there's a lot of shame in not feeling gratitude for adoption. There's a lot of social culture things, movies, television shows that kind of show that, but aren't necessarily getting to the root cause. A lot of times it's kind of the butt end of the joke, you're kind of the odd one out in your family, so you must be adopted. I'm sure maybe some of you have heard those jokes before. But yeah, so coming out of the fog is kind of the beginning process of realizing that there might be something more happening, and it's very confusing. So then the next kind of phrase I'm looking at is emotional dissonance. And this is kind of survival-based hypervigilance. How am I processing my emotions? How am I surviving? How am I staying a part of my community? And how am I safe? And actually, this one doesn't often actually look like distress. It looks like trying to figure out where you are in communities. So I actually have a picture here of myself when I was in Chinatown in New York City, and then a picture of a Lunar New Year celebration that I was a part of in college. And these kind of look both like happy pictures, because emotional dissonance is not necessarily something you can detect and see in someone, because they might be trying to get cues from around them, trying to fit in and trying to not be the odd one out. But it's very difficult when you are in connection to something that is related to your heritage. I remember when I was in New York, it was really isolating to go to some of the stores where the workers are Chinese and start speaking in Chinese to you. And for me, I learned Chinese, but being able to conversate to the complexity that people kind of expect you to be able to was really overwhelming and really a paralyzing and freeze type of moment. So that emotional dissonance and being distant or dissociative is very common, but a lot of adoptees don't really know it's even happening, and it kind of is just a fight or flight, but also a freeze. And then the last kind of verbiage I'll be talking about today is pre-verbal loss and trauma. So adoption at its core is trauma. It's a separation from first family that is not only present, a physical piece, but it's also an embodied piece. When you're pre-verbal, I'm sure as many of us know, some of those big development pieces come from that first year and a half or so. And when you aren't receiving care from someone who can give you some of those emotional cues, emotional mirroring, there's a lot of kicked in survival that happens. And this is something that babies don't necessarily know how to process and don't necessarily know how to act. And I might not remember most of that phase of my life, but your body really holds on to that, and it can kind of come up through different periods in your life. So now we're going to kind of look at the text for today. We're going to look at the second letter that Paul sent to the church in Corinth. And just for some context, I was grateful to have Andy Pokel to kind of help me explore this text, and his wife, Pastor Elise Pokel. And setting the scene here, this church in Corinth was one of the wealthiest churches in that time, and they were actually kind of starting to have meals and fellowship time before or after services. And this was kind of a key pivotal moment because they were really inviting the highest people in that church community, and not necessarily those who are of less stature or have less money. So this was kind of a plea from Paul saying, we as a church need to do better. It's not enough to worship with these people. We need to also include them. We need to be on the same playing field as them. And the kind of imagery that they choose to focus on is kind of the pottery and the clay jar. What that looks unexciting, just very simple and plain, but kind of when you break it open, you kind of can see the joy and the treasure that is within that. So that is kind of the imagery I'll be focusing on a little bit more today as the adoptee experience. And I kind of saw this as if I were looking at some of the images you see when you search up orphanage, and it kind of can be in any country. You see a lot of simplicity, maybe a lot of unhygienic spaces, and really crowded and underserved and underworked communities. So I kind of was looking at that as how that is really portrayed heavily in maybe in books and images, but also just maybe what we think of when we think orphanage. So yeah, that is what I'm kind of seeing there. Let me look at this quickly. Okay, here we are. So to kind of continue some textual exploration here, we're gonna kind of break down some of the pieces. So for fragility and power, Paul acknowledges human vulnerability, but God's power is also revealed through that weakness. And kind of it called to break down power and to do more than just worship with the lowly, as I said before. So in the context of adoption, I think it's our job to do more than just adopt. There is a large portion of people and also adoption agencies that kind of, once the child is adopted, that's kind of where the work ends, right? We've saved them, we have done our duty, and that's kind of it. Now they're gonna have this great, better life, and it's going to be fantastic. And the way adoption agencies kind of work right now, there is a little bit more care and education provided for those young age milestones, but once you're through adolescence, there's kind of nothing given by adoption agencies. And there are communities online, but you have to go looking for them. And even then, it's still a relatively new dynamic that's portrayed in social media. It's kind of a bigger movement now, but also in academia and other areas. So next, if we go to kind of a shared suffering, that kind of touches on what I was talking about before. And my vision and hope for this is really to not discourage adoption. I think it holds a powerful place in society. There are going to be children who do not have biological family, who are able to take care of them. But there's also a lot of family that would like to keep their families together. So kind of being in community with adoptees, working through the pains and joys of adoption, and kind of being able to share that education and knowledge with people you know, if you're looking to adopt, kind of making sure that you're being trauma informed there. And then we kind of see from Paul talking about suffering as not being meaningless, and that there's education in that, there's resilience in that, and there's also power that can be re-upped in that. And that's kind of how I see adoption and identity. And if we can shift over our mindset from grief shown by adoptees not being a sign of ingratitude, but a call for more support and love around them. Okay, so then we kind of can look at reimagining adoption through the gospel. We can kind of see ministry like parenting, fostering, adopting should be seen as grounded in truth and not optics. We can really start to ask ourselves, who is this helping? Who is this hurting? Is this child-centered care? Is this a solution for parents that may have their own trauma or grief, which is valid? A lot of families are looking to complete their family, and that can be a beautiful and joyous thing. But it also can be a place that gets really tricky. If you are in a community where you're expected to have a lot of children and it's kind of a moral standing for you, that can be easily projected onto adopted children. And there is a piece of conditional love that comes with being an adoptee, because we're taught at the very beginning of our makeup that if I am not doing X, I could be abandoned. I could be taken from that community. And that's something that really holds a lot of scarcity mindset and also trauma response as you get kind of older. It can get really impactful in a lot of things that are considered just regular day-to-day living. Going to school, it can be really impactful on academics and the ability to strive and be the best, so your adoptive family will be proud of you. It can manifest in how our eating habits are. It can affect eating disorders, disordered eating, and also binge eating. And also, food holds a lot of history. We can be really disconnected or connected to our cultural history when it comes to food. So that is one that has been kind of closer to my heart and my lived experience. So yeah, doing authentic ministry is really important for centering on trauma and grief. Again, it's valid, but not the main focus for the adoptive family. Spiritual vision and blindness. Are our systems trauma-informed? Are we having cultural competency requirements? And are we engaging in a transnational adoptee's lineage throughout their entire adolescence and beyond? For a lot of adoption agencies, it's kind of recommended, but a lot of the information you receive is kind of like what you would get if you were traveling to different countries, some kind of overviews of history and things that you might be able to participate in, but not necessarily kind of some of those deeper historical roots. What kinds of traditions are they having? Are they having a tradition of really having stories be orally passed down from generation to generation? And what are we missing from the narrative that's not necessarily brought up? Also, when we kind of look at politics, are we using adoptees as a commodified entity? Are we saying all life is precious and great, and therefore there's always adoption? It's often used for reproductive rights, and it's a very isolating feeling knowing that people are using your identity as something to piece either on any of the spectrums for politics. We also can see God in human weakness. Adoptees may feel discarded, kind of like flavorless salt or forgotten clay, but they carry stories that reflect God's glory. If we're looking at primal wounds and privilege, and the privilege of makeup, how are we seeing that being, or adoptees fitting into a box? Adoption is interesting because it is a population that is pretty grand and kind of all over the world as well. But again, once the adoptee is adopted, it's kind of a forgotten population that people tend to not think about all the time. For suffering as witness, I kind of really embolden people to look at shame and guilt from the adoptee's perspective, and embrace that. It is very hard to speak up on all of these feelings that adoptees might have because they're supposed to be grateful, what privilege they have to be in the family and communities here. So why would they ever feel sad or grief about losing first family? And I think that this vulnerability really reveals divine wisdom and actually plays a big role in understanding the different sorts of family makeup, but also the hurt and pain in that is something I think we can all hold together and share. And then 5, I forgot to put on here, but I do have hope in a better system for adoption. I think there is a lot that can be done with family reconciliation and moving away from the rescue model of adoption. And I also think that, if we invest in systems that are systems of care, we're making sure that these first families have the housing and the food and healthcare and education, that should be kind of that first step into how we can advocate for adoptees better. So kind of closing here, I am just kind of encouraging you to ask yourself, what clay jars do I carry? Whose jars have I ignored or dismissed? And I really want to remind everyone that God's treasure shines brightest through cracks, and there's no shame in being fragile. Adoption and family care must be approached with humility, honesty, intention, and gospel-centered love. I think that we can continue to hold adoption close to us. We can still be people who can advocate and also contribute to children-centered adoption. And if we choose not to have, adoption be a main focus in our life, how can we be a safe person for the adoptees in our life? How can we show up and just hold the pain of that so it's not so overwhelming for adoptees? And this can kind of look like a lot of things. It can look like just being aware of what kind of conversations are being had at family gatherings. When you go to a family gathering and there's maybe a new baby or someone who you can really pinpoint similar features, and maybe an adoptee in your life is kind of retreating from that or is feeling frozen and unsure kind of how to respond. It's kind of a daily reminder of you're the odd one out, and you won't necessarily have people around you who you can also connect that with. This also is present in a lot of school assignments, family trees, and just different displays kind of throughout adolescence for adoptees. And I kind of would invite you also to just notice messaging that is going on around you. If you see a television clip or a movie that's highlighting adoption, kind of just maybe start thinking to yourself, I've never thought about it from the adoptee's perspective. It's often just from the adoptive family perspective. And it can be interesting. There was a clip that I was shown at an adoptee conference, and it was a pretty funny clip. It's from Modern Family when Lily and Mitch and Cam are going to a Vietnamese restaurant for the first time. And I've seen some talk about that. So I would encourage you to go back and watch that and kind of see some of these complexities that Lily is dealing with. A big part of that clip is also her not wanting to be connected to that. And that's a very real experience for a lot of adoptees to push away. They want to focus on things that make them connected to their family. For Lily, it was she wanted to be gay like her dad's. But for adoptees on our day-to-day, it's kind of just whatever we can do to feel more connected. So yeah, that kind of wraps up a lot of the things I was going to talk about today. I do have a little bit of a poem I'd like to share. This is from Held, Blessings for the Depths, which is a publication by Infleshed, and they tend to focus and highlight liberation theology. So I invite you to listen from your own context, from your own self, but then also I challenge you to think, like, what does this mean to an adoptee who maybe isn't feeling comfortable with anything about how they're feeling? So this is called All the Way Down by Sarah S. Howell Miller. May you feel your anger all the way down. That is, may you know that solid and singular as it looks, your anger may well be a false bottom. May you have the wisdom to leave it in place while it protects you. May you have the courage to pull it up when it no longer serves you. May you find below love that longs for full expression, pain that cries out to be healed, desire that whispers in the holy dark, righteous indignation that fuels the work of justice. May you one day swim and not drown in the depth of what your anger hides. May we all meet you there. And yeah, then a little piece for everyone today. Just may you go into the world seeing through a different lens, honoring fragility, practicing bravery, and seeking power, not in saving others, but in walking with them. Thanks. Okay, cool.
I'll just say we'll share that clip from Modern Family. We'll include it in our email this next week so you guys can check that out. And the blessing too, I'll get a copy of that. So we'll make sure to get those things shared with you. There's so thank you again for taking the time and energy to prepare for today, because it's a lot when we ask somebody to come and share a part of their story. And so we appreciate that you have shared parts of your story and your wisdom, and for sharing your truth so that others may find a liberating word from God, who loves all of us. And all means all. So there's a couple fun questions, because you shared your poem, so that's one of them. If you would close us with a poem or a quote. So Kristie already did that part. Let's see. Do you have a favorite podcast that you like to listen to?
Yeah, so the podcast that I've really been connecting with right now is called Hello Inner Light. And it is a podcast that is part meditation, but also part highlighting different ways that we can embody the problems or issues or trauma that we have within ourselves and being able to release it in a whole body way. So it's somatic practice and healing, trauma informed. It's been really great for me to kind of do in the middle of my day to kind of recenter and focus myself. And she has just so many cool topics that I never even knew were a thing, and I think they're really applicable for any life issues we're kind of having. And she's on Spotify and YouTube, and they're all about like 20 to 30 minutes. So I definitely do that.
Cool.
Yeah, recommend
Thank
that.
you.
Hello, Inner Light.
We can share that too.
Great.
Easy,
Cool.
Easy to do. Yeah, Hello Inner Light. Correct?
Yes,
That's the name of the
correct. Yeah.
podcast. Yep. And then, if heaven exists and God has a voice, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive?
Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily have the exact words, but I would hope for some sort of really deep peace and reconciliation with all parts of the adoptee constellation. It really varies, adoptee to how interested they are in having that kind of connection to adoption. And for a lot of people, it can really be in different parts of their life. There might be people who are interested in college, like myself. There might be people who it doesn't really feel like it's that big for them until maybe they're starting their own family, or maybe different life instances happen for them. So that was another thing that I kind of forgot to mention was there's a lot of resources online for adoption, but there's also a lot of voices in it that can span from child-centered adoption, but also to abolition of adoption. So it kind of, there's a lot of opinions on it. There's a lot of ways people look at it. Some people look at it like kind of a forced migration. This one's a little intense to me personally, but some people look at it as a form of human trafficking. And it's hard for me to kind of look at it that way, because then you're really getting into like the politics of adoption and the money piece that really has been challenging. But I think what I would like for God to do or say is just some sort of reconciliation piece that provides peace for all adoptees, no matter what kind of stage they end their life with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kristie.
Thanks.
I invite you to pray with me.